river flows interact with the sea to create an oscillating salinity gradient. Here the river will deposit its rich sediments and nutrients, creating deltas and replenishing beaches. These interactions of the waters over the lands and into the seas are one of the great biological engines found on the planet, creating the full range of conditions that freshwater and estuarine species need during their various life stages, and these functions depend intimately on natural river flows. Because of these variations and interactions, natural rivers are dynamic and complex. Biological diversity thrives in complex dynamic systems. It suffers in simplified static systems. Dams simplify rivers and make them static. If you understand that much about freshwater ecology, you already know a lot. Dynamic floodplains, wetlands, estuaries, and deltas are also vital for a broad range of human livelihoods and food production systems. In Africa and Asia in particular, many people grow their food in the floodplains, where the annual floods provide the soil moisture and nutrients that their crops require. They plant and harvest their crops as the river recedes after the rainy season. These conditions also produce the grasslands that herders use for their cows and sheep. Dynamic rivers create the conditions in which fish can breed and grow and be harvested. And the inundation of the lands recharges the groundwater system, which is often the main source of drinking water for rural communities. When these physical processes change, so do the important services that human communities have depended upon since the dawn of civilization. Dams fundamentally change these natural conditions. Their reservoirs even out the variation in river flows so that water can be captured in the wet season for use in the dry season, and carried over from the wetter years to the drier years. Tamed rivers no longer flow over their banks to nourish and rejuvenate the floodplains. Wetlands become stranded and are no longer replenished. Tame rivers are no longer rivers, really. They may be water supply systems, they may be power plants, but they are no longer productive rivers, and the world is a poorer place for that. A dam's control of river flows can greatly alter the interaction between fresh and salt water within an estuary. Due to these changes, many native species may decline or become extinct, while non-native species may flourish, leading to a significant decline in both the estuary's environmental health and its value to human communities. Many rivers no longer reach the sea for much of the year. These include the Yellow River, the Mother River of China, the Indus River in Pakistan, the Colorado River, and the Rio Grande in the United States. Many other rivers reach the sea in such impaired condition that they cannot support vital estuarine processes. Just as rivers form a delta when they reach the sea, sediments also drop out of moving water when a river enters the still water of the reservoir. As reservoirs trap sediments, their capacity to store water diminishes. Eventually, most reservoirs will become huge plugs of silt and cease to function, unless they are designed to flush the sediment through the dam periodically. In reality, it's very difficult to flush sediments from a big dam because the sediment falls out where the river enters the reservoir, not at the base of the dam. The capture of sediment in the reservoir means that the water released into the downstream channel is sediment-starved. It will try to pick up as much sediment as it can from the banks and beds of the downstream river. If the flow is confined to the channel, it will tend to cut downward and make the channel deeper and the banks steeper. The river will lose its ability to meander and will lose the complex geomorphic patterns that create the varied and productive riverine habitats. In arid areas, this incision of the river downward will also drain the groundwater table below the root zone of the trees and plants, leaving a desiccated floodplain. Take the lower Zambezi River. Its verdant grasslands used to support some of the largest game herds in southern Africa. Now the land has turned to desert and the game are gone. So is the grazing that used to sustain rural communities. Sediment-starved rivers will no longer replenish the ocean shorelines and beaches, damaging the mangrove and nearshore ecosystems. This is what is happening due to the damming of the Volta River in Ghana and the Nile River in Egypt, where the beaches are eroding at the astonishing rate of 10 to 12 meters per year. After 100 years of altering rivers, river scientists have recently developed methods for estimating the flow requirements needed to restore a river's ecological health. Various methods within two overarching approaches are used: With the empirically based approach, we seek to understand the relationship between river flows and biological responses. This enables us to figure how to restore lost ecological functions and livelihoods. This image shows the linkages between a fish species' life history and the river's flow regime. The annual flood pulse is a cue for adult fish to migrate and then spawn so that their offspring can rear within reproductive floodplain habitats. Now we can see the managed hydrograph, which has greatly reduced the annual flood peak, and the river no longer regularly connects with its floodplain. If we know key information, such as the time of year that the fish typically migrated in response to the flooding cue, and what flow is necessary for the river to connect with the floodplain, then we can prescribe a specific restoration flow to restore these important processes. A restoration flow is illustrated here. An alternative approach is the natural paradigm method. Here we can assume that the natural flow pattern that occurred before the river was dammed provided the appropriate conditions for a broad range of species and biological processes. Why? Because those species co-evolved with those flow conditions. However, it may be impossible or undesirable to restore some parts of the natural hydrograph. For instance, we may not want to recreate the extreme flood events that occurred under natural conditions because they would damage structures or land uses that were developed since the dam was built. So we eliminate these from the restoration hydrograph. Similarly, we may not want to recreate the extreme low flow events because they will deprive communities of water supply or desired river navigation. The resulting modified natural hydrograph can serve as a flow restoration target. But what if the restoration hydrograph conflicts with the other economic benefits of the river, such as power generation or water supply? Well, stay tuned, because reconciling those conflicts is the subject of the rest of this video. We can apply these methods in many types of rivers to understand their environmental water demands. Yet, less work has been done to understand the other side of the ledger, the environmental water supplies. That is, the tools and techniques for generating the desired environmental flows in developed river systems. Restoration goals without practical means will never achieve healthy, functioning river systems. Why has so little attention been paid to the supply side? Because generating environmental flows is not just about changing the operation of the dams. The dams are just the storage element of a flood control system, an irrigation project, or the hydropower component of an electrical grid system. These provide important benefits that their beneficiaries are not willing to give up. So, to permanently alter the operations of these dams for environmental benefits, often we must reoperate the entire water management system. We can call this re-optimization. This is what it means. About half of the major dams in the world were built primarily for agricultural irrigation. The rest were built primarily for hydropower or flood control. Many are operated to provide multiple benefits. The challenge now is to add another benefit to the operational objectives, namely restoration of the downstream environment, but without significantly diminishing the economic benefits for which the dams were originally designed and operated. As we have already seen, the functions of dams is to store water, which inevitably distorts the natural hydrograph. Re-optimization of dam operations entails, as you would expect, reversing this distortion, essentially restoring the key components of the natural hydrograph. How do we do that? By changing the storage regime. Essentially, we want to move the operations of the dam in the direction of releasing water at the same rate at which it flows into the reservoir. Ideally, the dam just passes the natural hydrograph through the reservoir and into the downstream channel with as little distortion as possible. This is commonly called run-of-the-river operations. We can move operations in this direction by utilizing natural storage features in the river basin, such as aquifers and floodplains, in conjunction with the artificial storage of the reservoir. You see, dams aren't the only way to store water for human benefit. We can often link our engineered storage systems with the natural storage systems that have always been there. As we will see, the appropriate technique for re-optimizing any particular dam will depend on the purpose for which it is operated. Yet many large dams are operated for multiple purposes. So, to know what re-optimization technique to apply, we need to ask which objective